Hello everyone, it's Diamond Mentor Studios, and it's time for another game review. Last time I kicked off the Mario Marathon on this channel by covering the Red Plumber's first true entry into the video game world. Despite its several flaws and dated aspects, I still found it to be a generally enjoyable game that is one of the best titles on the NES, which is doubly impressive considering how early it was released in the system's lifespan. Now that we're done, it's time to move on to the sequel, and this is a weird one. If you're familiar with video game history, then you know that Nintendo really struggled to create a sequel to their smash hit, which led to there being two sequels to Super Mario Bros., both called Super Mario Bros. 2. Confused? So am I. One was released in Japan exclusively, at least at the time of its release in 1986, and the other was for the West. In this review, I'm going to cover my thoughts on both of these games, and judging by the timestamp, this is going to be rather quick. Let's begin with the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2, called Lost Levels over here in the West, which is what I'll call it from now on. Development of this version of Super Mario Bros. 2 started pretty much right after the first game was released. The Mario creators were in the process of creating an arcade version of the game called Versus Super Mario Bros., in which they experimented with much harder levels. The team quite enjoyed them, and thought that the fans of the first game would as well. Thus, they began development on a sequel that would eventually become Lost Levels as we know it today. Development on this title went very differently than the first game. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto didn't have the time to take the role of director for this new game because he was busy making The Legend of Zelda, so directorial duties were handed over to Takashi Tezuka. Miyamoto still helped with the project, he just didn't serve as its director this time. Development also shifted to the then newly released Famicom Disk System, an add-on that allowed the Famicom, the Japanese NES, to play games using proprietary floppy disks, and they reused the same engine from the original game. The team set out to create a game that was much more difficult than the first, expecting that players had mastered the original. They even included a few levels from Versus Super Mario Bros. As such, the packaging was marked as for super players. Following its release, it became incredibly popular in Japan, so Nintendo sent it to their American subsidiary for review. However, once it arrived there, product tester at Nintendo of America, Howard Phillips, was appalled by what he played. He said,
"As I continued to play, I found that Super Mario Bros. 2 asked me again and again to take a leap of faith, and each of these leaps resulted in my immediate death. This was not a fun game to play, it was punishment. Undeserved punishment."
He felt that it was unfairly difficult and believed that it would not sell well on the Western market, and with that, a request was made for a sequel with much more accessible difficulty. As a result of this, the game never saw a localized version on the NES, and it wouldn't see the light of day in the US until it was included in the Super Mario All-Stars collection on the SNES. However, this version makes some changes that result in an overall much easier game. The original Disk System version wouldn't be released over here until the 7th generation, when it was put up for sale on the Wii's Virtual Console. As for my experiences, I first played it on VC. I don't remember anything about it other than the strange, almost Mandela effect thing. I distinctly remember seeing Mario jump on a sideways version of the game's logo during the short demo that plays if you leave the game idle for long enough on the title screen. It might have been a dream, but honestly, I'm not sure. Regardless, I wouldn't actually play Lost Levels until I started collecting games, when I got an SNES and a copy of Super Mario All-Stars, but I never got anywhere in it for obvious reasons. So for the sake of this review, I tried playing it on the Switch Online NES application. Let me tell you, I fully agree with what Howard Phillips had to say. Not only is this game bad, it's really bad. It's without a doubt my personal least favorite Mario game of all time, and is one of the 3 games in the series that I don't like. So let's dive in and discuss the pros and many cons, shall we? To start, the story is lazy as hell. Kinda fitting, isn't it? This game presumably takes place right after the original. After Mario saves her from Bowser, Peach gives him a more difficult quest. She voluntarily gets kidnapped again, I guess, and Mario has to save her again. And that's it. Yep, nothing else. It's yet another bland, pointless, shitty plot that almost every NES game had. I get that memory was extremely limited and all that, and gameplay was the main focus here, but they could have at least come up with a better explanation as to why Mario has to save Peach again, other than giving him a more difficult quest. Personally, I don't consider this game to be canon at all. Well, assuming Mario even has canon to begin with. It's nonsensical, pointless plot even by the standards of the 1980s. Next, the visuals and music. I'm lumping these together because there's almost nothing to say about either. Both are shining beacons of just how lazy and slapped together this product was as a whole. When I said that they reused the same engine from the first game, yeah, I really meant that. The graphics are almost identical to the original. Ugly color scheme, low detailed assets, samey looking worlds and all. The only difference is the textures for the ground and brick tiles, which actually look worse than the original, believe it or not. They're downright eye-searing and very unpleasant to look at. Oh, and the music? It's the exact same songs from Mario 1. Seriously. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, since the music of Mario 1 is very good. Like I said in my last review, just goes to show how lazy Lost Levels is. Seriously, if you think Nintendo can sometimes be lazy these days, which they absolutely are sometimes, just remember that they've sometimes pulled this shit from the beginning. With that, we've reached the gameplay, and oh my Jesus Christ in heaven above, forgive my sins, it's absolutely atrocious! This game has by far some of the worst gameplay I've ever experienced. It's right up there with Crash Bandicoot, Virtual Bart, and Army Men Soldiers of Misfortune as one of the worst and most painful video games I've ever played in my life. For one, the controls have seen no improvements whatsoever from the original game and have been made even worse. If you remember back to my review of Mario 1, I said that the control was functional, if a bit too heavy and stiff at times. In Lost Levels, however, I can no longer excuse it. Sequels are an opportunity to improve, to iron out any flaws or annoyances that previous games had. But nope. I guess Nintendo was too busy putting onion rings on their dicks to care in this case. They've also made it so bouncing on enemies launches you up much higher, which feels incredibly awkward. This didn't happen in the original game, so they've not only deliberately ignored the opportunity to make the controls better, but they've also made them even worse. Bravo, 1986 era Nintendo, bravo. However, my biggest problem with Lost Levels, and you probably saw this one coming, is the lamentably miserable level design. I'm not kidding when I say this game probably has some of the worst level design I've ever seen. It's not balanced around the clunky controls at all, and features elements that completely contradict all platforming sensibilities. I get that the game was intentionally designed to be hard, but that doesn't excuse how atrociously broken and unplayable the stage design is. To begin, the platforming is by far the worst in the entire series. It's stretched out as far as they can possibly make it, meaning you'll have to jump from the very edge of a platform to make most of the jumps. The control certainly doesn't help with this at all, and I slipped and fell off the platforms over and over again through no fault of my own. Additionally, the set pieces are downright rage-inducing, especially those stupid springs that launch you a million miles into the air without giving you so much as a hint as to where you'll land. The later parts of the game also incorporate shitty wind gimmicks, but to be honest, I didn't play that far. Second, the enemy placement is absolutely atrocious. This game seems to think that spamming flying Koopas everywhere and placing enemies in large groups that overwhelm you is the greatest game design idea in history. They also place bloopers, those annoying enemies from the first game's water levels, above water, alongside tons of enemies that are a pain in the ass to dodge. This enemy placement is so bad that it would make Metropolis Zone's deadly trio and the lab's electrified cocksucker scientists blush. This game was so bad that I legitimately could not stomach playing it normally. Trust me, I tried, but I couldn't do it. By the third level, I began using the Switch Online save state feature. I'm not usually the kind of person to abuse save states, since it completely defeats the point of a platformer to begin with. However, this game was bad enough that I couldn't be asked to play the game without them. And I still hated playing it. Fuck yeah. Oh, and if you're going to accuse me of sucking at the game, listen to me. I am not someone who hates difficulty in games. I've fully completed the first two Donkey Kong Country games before, and I've gotten full completion in Super Mario Sunshine more times than I can count. I'm also capable of getting an A rank on Final Rush, Final Chase, Cannon's Court, and Mad Space in Sonic Adventure 2. I've done all of these things and enjoyed my time doing so. I'm not criticizing Lost Levels for being hard, I'm criticizing it for being designed badly. If it was actually well-designed difficulty, then I would have no problem with it being as tough as it is, but the fact that none of these challenges are even remotely well-designed, I can't come to any other conclusion than to say the game itself is bad. I'm sorry. I managed to get to the second world when I soon came to a dead end. It was a gap that was far too wide to make it over. There was no hint on what to do, nothing. I wankered around like a jackass for several minutes until I found a hidden block that was supposedly supposed to jump on. Problem is, Mario's jump is far too low, so there was absolutely no way to progress. At this point, I threw in the towel. Maybe there was something I glossed over, but I really don't give a shit. I wasn't enjoying this game at all, so instead of continuing to subject myself to any more of this torture, I quit the game and have no intention of ever looking back. This game is absolute garbage. It is without a doubt one of the worst games I have ever played. It legitimately feels like it was maliciously engineered to be as frustrating as possible, not dissimilar to the likes of Mega Man X6. It's baffling to me that an otherwise incredible game franchise, Super Mario, can have such an atrocious piece of shit as a part of it, and so early on in its life at that. In retrospect, it's a miracle that this abomination wasn't released overseas, since it may have very well killed the franchise outright. This is the closest equivalent that the Mario series has to a Sonic 06. A broken, rushed, atrocious piece of shit that's legendary with how bad it is. I would honestly play Crash Bandicoot over this. Even though Crash is an utterly atrocious game as well, it's at least possible to power through all the bad design and finish the game. Here, however, I was so repulsed that I couldn't be bothered to play past the second world. It really is that bad. So now that that's all over with, let's move on to the other sequel to Mario 1, Super Mario Bros. 2 for the NES. The development history for this one is even stranger than Lost Levels. Following Howard Phillips' wise decision to reject that game, Nintendo was in search of a new game to release. They had very little time and they risked allowing Mario to slip into obscurity if they didn't act immediately. Thankfully, they would have their chance come 1987. Around this time, Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development member Kensuke Tanabe, who I definitely butchered the name of, had an idea for a new type of platformer. Instead of progressing horizontally, he envisioned a game where the screen scrolled vertically. Two players would simultaneously play and would have the ability to pick up and throw each other in continuous ascending. Now I know where Super Mario Bros. Wii got this idea. Anyways, this concept alone was supposedly not enough to give the team satisfying gameplay, so they held off on making a game based around it. Meanwhile, Nintendo had entered a collaboration with Fuji Television and had agreed to develop a game starring the characters from their program named Yume Kojo 87. Miyamoto and Tanabe both worked on this new title called Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, and elements from the vertical platformer idea were incorporated. Many levels included vertical sections, and the mechanic of picking up another player and throwing them was repurposed to throwing enemies and vegetables obtained from plants. There were 4 playable characters, which could be selected from the menu upon reaching a new world. Even though it was different from Super Mario Bros., many people still thought there were a lot of similarities. As such, Doki Doki Panic was exactly what Nintendo needed following the Lost Levels fiasco. Since they were the developers and Fuji TV only owned the characters, Nintendo owned the rights to the game's code, so selling a modified version wouldn't get them into legal trouble. Because of its similarities to Mario and their recent need for a sequel to the first game in the US, Nintendo essentially created the world's first ROM hack that I know of and replaced the Yume Kojo characters with Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, and a Toad. They also changed it so you can select a character with each stage, replace several assets to be more Mario-like, and improve the visuals in certain places. This hack was released as Super Mario Bros. 2 in the West in 1988, where it served as the cover to the first issue of Nintendo Power. It was so popular that it easily sold out at every store, a fact that was not helped by the worldwide chip shortage at the time. As for me, I also played Super Mario Bros. 2 on the Wii Virtual Console. Like Lost Levels, I have very few memories of playing it back then, and only remember doing so when I got Super Mario All-Stars in late 2017 and an NES copy in early 2018. During the time I was out of commission for several months because of a severe bone fracture in my left leg. I remember enjoying it back then, but that was several years ago, and I never ended up beating either version. So after revisiting it again for this review, what do I think of it? Well, it's certainly a lot better than Lost Levels since it's actually playable, but to be entirely honest, I don't really like this game that much either. It's not a super awful game or anything, but I don't personally enjoy playing it all that much. Before we get into that though, let's start with some positives. The story is actually rather interesting by Mario standards. It's of course nothing mind-blowingly deep, but it's different enough from the other entries to stand out in a good way. Mario, Luigi, Peach, and some random Toad are all out for a picnic one day when they fall asleep. They all end up having the same dream and arrive in a place known as Subcon, a kingdom of dreams. Get it? Subcon? Subconscious? Yeah, whatever. The kingdom is ruled by a tyrant, an evil frog king named Wart, who has placed a curse on the kingdom's people. Eager to help, Mario and friends set off to save the people of Subcon from the tyrannical rule of Wart. So yeah, it's fairly different from the norm. At this time, Peach having to get rescued over and over again wasn't a set standard, so the devs were more willing to try other plots. It motivates gameplay well enough as well, so I'd say it does the job of a video game plot just fine. Next, the graphics, and these are a huge step up from the previous 2 games. Obviously, they're still somewhat primitive because it's the NES we're talking about, but it looks quite good for the year of release. The colors are much more vibrant than before, the sprites and environments have a bit more detail, and there's a lot more variety to the locations you visit. I wouldn't call it the best looking Mario game on the NES, but it's decently appealing for the time and a massive improvement from Mario 1, and especially Lost Levels. Next up, the music. Thankfully, this game doesn't reuse the Mario 1 music again, considering it wasn't originally a Mario game. I wouldn't call the actual compositions better than the first game, but the instrumentation is definitely a step up, and it doesn't have much early NES twang to it. I don't know what else to do but give you a sampling of a few standout tracks. Anyways, it's finally time to move on to the gameplay. Unfortunately, this is where my problems with the game come in. Like I said, Super Mario Bros. 2 isn't an atrocious game, and I wouldn't call it garbage by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely find it hard to enjoy for several reasons. For fairness' sake though, let's discuss some positives, because unlike Lost Levels, there actually are a few. First, I think the level design is actually pretty good overall. Whereas Mario 1 was quite enjoyable, its level design was generally rather flat and basic. Mario 2, on the other hand, features much more varied level structures, particularly with the addition of vertical sections. The actual platforming isn't that bad either, and it's pretty well designed in general. You can even scroll the screen backwards. I didn't mention the fact you couldn't go back in the Mario 1 review because it didn't really bother me, but the fact you can do this in Mario 2 is an improvement that all future games will carry over. I also quite like the different playable characters, and they provide some strategy with how you play the game. Mario is the most balanced character with an average jump height and speed. Luigi provides a very high jump with floatier physics, which might help in certain situations. Toad is incredibly slow and has piss or jump height, but is great for bosses because of how quickly he grabs items. And finally, Peach is the best character for platforming, since she has a hover move that allows you to extend your jumps. However, she sucks on bosses because of how slowly she grabs items. All things considered, this is a fairly well implemented system, and offers players a fair few options for tackling different levels. The only problem is that you can't switch characters after dying, so you're stuck with whatever you pick until you beat that stage, but besides that, I quite like this system. Unfortunately, though, that's where the positives kind of end. SMB2 has a few flaws that ultimately make me not enjoy it as a package. For one, I'm not a fan of how the characters handle. They're far more slippery than in Mario 1, and movement feels even more imprecise because of it. Personally, I take controls that are a little bit too stiff over ones that are overly slippery, and this is one of those cases. I also find that the collision detection can be pretty inconsistent. Sometimes you may seemingly fall through certain platforms because of their sides at bottom having no collision. Enemy attacks are also fairly inconsistent, and sometimes I can seemingly get hit by something that doesn't seem like it should have hit me. Neither of these things are constant problems, but they happen just frequently enough to get on my nerves. Much worse is the actual enemy placement itself. Oftentimes, enemies are put in spots where they can blindside you from off screen, or multiple are put in spots that complement each other and make it really annoying to avoid damage. This is a much more persistent issue than the collision, and I die left and right because of annoying enemy placements. I won't lie, these enemies made me very frustrated at points. The health system is also something I'm not fond of. To be fair, it does make some improvements over Mario 1. There's no Fire Flower this time, and instead you have multiple hit points. If you get more than 2, then the characters won't shrink after taking a single hit. This fact alone is better than Mario 1, where getting hit with a Fire Flower has made you shrink back to small Mario. Problem then is how hard it is to increase your health bar and how scarce health refills are. The only way to get more than 2 hits is by finding a magic potion in the ground and finding a mushroom in the door it spawns. The thing is, you have no way to tell where to throw the potion down to guarantee a mushroom, and there's a chance you won't find one at all. Additionally, if you lose a health point, which is very likely given the enemy placement, the only way to earn it back is to get another mushroom or collect a certain number of cherries to spawn a floating heart. Dying also restores your health, but obviously you don't want to do that. This is just an artificial way of making the game more punishing, since you'll often enter bosses or levels at a critical disadvantage. Even with all of this crap, I might have been somewhat forgiving of it. It would have been annoying, yes, but I might have been able to more or less tolerate it if it wasn't for one simple fact. Super Mario Bros. 2 has limited continues, and getting extra lives is next to impossible. Yeah, sure, Mario 1 also had these issues, but it had the continue code that pretty much nullified them. SMB2, on the other hand, has no such code, at least that I know of. Additionally, the only way to get an extra life is to gather coins from the potion areas and win a slot machine game. Yes, really, and it's nearly impossible to win. You can also find 1-ups throughout the levels, but these are exceedingly rare. This means you'll always be at a shortage of lives, which is not good when combined with limited continues. These continues also start you at the beginning of the world instead of the actual level you died on. Sure, SMB1 also did this, but there I found it to be a reasonable punishment. Here the game is bogged down with much more annoyances, so I'm a lot less accepting of this punishment. And honestly, that's it for SMB2. While I do think there was a good game buried in here somewhere, the iffy control, poor enemy placement, unbalanced health system, and limited continues prevent me from enjoying the game. I can fully understand why someone would like it more than I do, and I don't begrudge those who do. Remember, I don't think this is an outright terrible game or anything, I just don't personally enjoy playing it all that much. So if you enjoy it, don't stop on my account. Finally, that's that chapter of Mario history covered. As you can see, Nintendo really struggled to follow up on the smash hit that was Super Mario Bros. They not only made an outright atrocious sequel that wasn't released outside of Japan for a long time, they followed it up with a hit and mostly missed sequel in North America and Europe. However, the games still managed to be immensely successful in their respective regions, which means that Nintendo still had a chance to truly take the series to the next level. They set their sights on creating an impressive showstopper of a Mario game. Next time on the Mario Marathon, we'll find out whether that ambition paid off when I look at Super Mario Bros. 3, again for the NES. In any event, this has been Diamond Miner Studios, and I'll see you in the next review. Have a good one.
There's no joke here, lost levels just sucks ass.